Good evening. My name is Dr. Daniel Wesche, and I'm the Associate Head of School here at Landmark Christian School. Thank you for joining this evening for the Landmark Aviation Academy webinar. The purpose of this webinar is to share information regarding the Landmark Aviation Academy and answer your questions at the conclusion of this broadcast. You may type in your question at any time during the webinar, and we encourage you to do so. Tonight's webinar is audio and slides only. On behalf of Head of School, Dr. Jason McMaster, we're looking forward to a bright future and the opening of the Landmark Aviation Academy. Jason is not able to be here with us tonight, but we recognize him as the one who cast the vision of the Landmark Aviation Academy and brought us together here. Joining me on our webinar panel is Dr. Jim Lee, Landmark Christian's pastor of biblical diversity and community relations. Besides being a pastor for 28 years, Jim is also a licensed commercial pilot and flew for SkyWest Airlines on the West. He will be the Aviation Academy's first instructor. Thanks for being a part of this tonight, Jim.
You're welcome, and good evening, everyone. Well, I cannot even begin to tell you how excited I am to be a part of this amazing new launch of the Landmark Aviation Academy. When I was 3 years old, a long time ago, my dad took a job with a major airline, and I immediately became a flying enthusiast. I was that kid in school that was always doodling, always drawing airplanes or gazing into the sky. And now I'll have the chance to teach and inspire kids about aviation. It is truly a dream come true.
Well, tonight, Jim will tell us a little bit about the mission of the Aviation Academy. We'll review the mission, vision, and core values of Landmark Christian School. We will discuss the question, why aviation? We'll also discuss our inaugural course, Aviation 1, and then we'll have some time for some Q&A. Well, before we jump into the discussion about the Aviation Academy, we always want to begin with the very foundation of who we are as Landmark Christian School by reviewing our mission, vision, and core values. Our mission is to partner with Christian families by equipping college-bound students to embrace a Christ-centered worldview, grow as servant leaders, and steward God's unique purpose for their lives. Our vision is that every student be prepared to impact the world for Jesus Christ. And our core values at Landmark are that we apply God's truth in our daily lives, we embody a passion for excellence, we choose to serve others every day, we embrace diversity and value every student, and we are a community of love and grace.
So Dr. Wesche, before we move on, would it be okay with you if I showed a picture back in the day when I was flying professionally?
Okay, you have one here?
Yeah.
Oh, come on, Jim, that's not you, that's Chuck Yeager. And that's a Bell X-1, you're old, Jim, but that bird is well before your time.
Well, okay, but hey, I mean, Daniel, every pilot wants to be Chuck Yeager. The mission of the Landmark Aviation Academy is to prepare young flight enthusiasts to impact the world through professional aviation. So why is Landmark starting an aviation academy? One simple word: demand. The world of aviation continues to globally expand, and we want to be on the forefront of educating future aviation professionals. So let me give you some examples. First of all, airline pilots. A 2017 article in Forbes estimated that the world will need 637,000 new airline pilots by the year 2037. That's less than 20 years away. But the crucial adjective for pilots is the word qualified. Qualified pilots will be in huge demand. And major airlines are especially interested in females and minorities. The world will not only need airline pilots, it will need missionary, military, cargo, corporate, and medical pilots. Now, by the way, this is Captain Wendy Rexton and her daughter Kelly. They're Delta airline pilots, the first mom-daughter crew to operate a flight for Delta. Pretty amazing. Secondly, airplane mechanics. There is a tremendous and growing need for trained airplane mechanics known as A&Ps. Airframe and power plant mechanics. We are just 15 minutes away from Delta Airlines, the second largest airline in the world. Right now, 75% of their mechanics are eligible to retire. In 2017, the average age for an airline mechanic was 51 years old. Like my kids say, hey, Dad, 51 is old. Even missionary pilots many times are required to be mechanics as well. Thirdly, flight dispatchers are needed on the ground to flight plan and ensure the safety and success of a flight. The work is critical to make sure thousands of flights operate on schedule on a daily basis. They keep track of crew time, weather, route of flight, and fuel requirements. I recently was stopped by a random customer in Publix. I was wearing a flight jacket, and he asked where I worked. When I told him Landmark was opening an aviation academy, he said, make sure you tell those kids that Delta is always looking for talented dispatchers. Fourth, the air traffic controllers in the United States are getting older, and the demand to replace them with new and young talent is on the rise. In 2018, the number of certified aircraft controllers was at an all-time 30-year low in the United States. And there are no flights without gifted air traffic controllers on the ground. Fifthly, in 2018, $3.8 billion was spent by airports and airlines on cybersecurity. Even my own dad worked as a computer programmer for American Airlines for almost 30 years. His job was critical in keeping the operational side of the airline working efficiently. And one last need. I feel the need for speed.
You just couldn't resist the Top Gun reference, could you? One more of those, and your goose is cooked.
Good one, Dr. Weshy. Next slide. The Aviation Academy will open in the fall of 2019 with one class in the high school, Aviation 1. The class will cover a full range of topics. Just some areas include the following: careers in aviation, and we mentioned some of those earlier. Aviation history. We would not have 21st century flight capabilities today without a hall of fame of courageous people such as Leonardo da Vinci. This guy was drawing airplanes in the 15 and 1600s. He was the original doodler of aircraft. The Wright Brothers, Orville and Wilbur, the first to fly on December 17th, 1903 in North Carolina. Charles Lindbergh, the first pilot to fly across the Atlantic in 1927. Amelia Earhart, the first woman to cross the Atlantic Ocean only 5 years later in 1932. Now, this young lady was a pilot before Lindbergh and Earhart. This is Bessie Coleman, the first Black and Native American female pilot in the United States. She obtained her license in 1921. Who can forget the Tuskegee Airmen of World War II, the first Black aviators in the military that flew over 15,000 sorties? And of course, my own personal hero, Chuck Yeager, the first man to break the sound barrier over the Mojave Desert in California, 767 miles per hour. Do you recognize these two pilots? Their names are Stephanie Johnson and Don Cook. It was only 2 years ago that for the first time in the history of Delta Airlines, 2 African-American female pilots operated Delta flights. The physics of flight. It doesn't matter if you're looking at a Cessna 172 or a Boeing 747. Every plane has the same forces of flight: thrust, drag, lift, and gravity. Have you ever looked at one of these babies and wondered, how in the world does that thing get off the ground? The physics of flight are amazing. Navigation. The goal of navigation, the goal of aviation, is to get an aircraft from point A to point B safely and on time. Pilots still today navigate by sight, such as following ground references from the air, or by ground waypoints using radio frequencies or GPS. Students will learn how to read complex aviation maps on paper or on an iPad. And I promise you, that map is not as complicated as it looks. I can explain it to a 5th grader. Next is meteorology. You cannot be in aviation without understanding weather. The best pilots in the world know when to fly and when not to fly based on the weather. We have a saying in aviation: it's better to be on the ground wishing you were in the air than being in the air wishing you were on the ground. Every pilot knows the difference between a cumulus cloud and a cumulus nimbus cloud. Flight simulators. The most advanced flight simulators in the world exist right down the street at Delta's headquarters. Wouldn't it be great if we could take a group of young aviators and see them in person? Field trips. We are only 15 minutes away from the busiest airport in the world that is getting a $6 billion makeover. And the Super Bowl crowd just got to see that beautiful airport. We have parents that work in aviation. We have retired military pilots all around us. The Tuskegee Airmen Museum is only 100 miles away in Alabama. People are excited and want to help. They want to jump on board. And we won't just be in the books or in the classroom. Aviation is something that we will see and experience as well.
All right. Well, now it's time for some Q&As. Feel free to send in your questions. We've had some typing in and just asking some questions as we have gone through the presentation. So I encourage you guys to go ahead and type some more in, and we will get to as many of them as we possibly can. You see there on the screen Dr. Jim Lee's contact information. And if there's any questions that we don't answer here, feel free to contact him and to send him an email, to give him a call, and we'll be able to try to answer any questions that you might have. Starting us off, for our first question here, we have one that came through that asks, is the Aviation Academy a flight school?
Well, in terms of a traditional definition, we're not a flight school because we don't own aircraft. We don't give flying lessons. But I guarantee that by the time a Landmark graduate has taken some courses through the Aviation Academy, by the time they actually take flying lessons, particularly with the ground school portion, they will be way ahead of the pack.
Okay. And then what age group will benefit most from this program?
Well, initially, particularly starting next year, we're going to offer this for 9th through 12th grade and then slowly expand our program. You know, one thing I want to read, and this just goes to my earlier point, is a father here, just a second, we're scrolling here a little bit, a parent here by the name of Herb, and he just wanted to reach out and offer himself as a possible resource for Landmark. He was a CFII and MEI at Flight Safety. I know exactly what those places are. And he's currently a simulator instructor and pilot for Delta Airlines, flying the 757 and 767. And that's just, Herb, thanks so much for that. That's just an example of current parents that are involved in aviation that are extremely enthusiastic and want to help.
That's great. So we have a couple questions that are around this idea of providing some flying time for students, whether that be partnerships with local flight schools, or what will we do if a student wants to learn how to fly while they're a Landmark student. Could you talk to us a little bit about that process, whether that be pursuing the private pilots or going from there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we don't have any doubt that as high school students get into this program, that they'll want to get beyond the classroom. And, you know, particularly, I've already talked to one young man that would like to get his private pilot's license as soon as he turns 17 years old. And he's actually already soloed. So the great thing is, because we're such an aviation community here, even though we're not a flight school, we can point interested students to a flying club or to a flight school at Peachtree City Airport or at Noonan Airport.
Great. So one question that has come through, and we have a couple different variations on it. It's asking what ages again, like who can take Aviation 1? Aviation 1 is open to our Landmark high school students, and we are going to progress through from Aviation 1 to Aviation 2 and Aviation 3 and so on, all the way through the high school curriculum. But we are also working to include elements of aviation into our STEM and science curricula, going down the grades through middle school and elementary school, and even sharing some of our guest speakers and some of our experiences from our students with some of our young younger students here so that they can have a really good, not only a preparation, but they also can have a touch point for the excitement that is going on here as we develop the Aviation Academy here at Landmark.
All right, so there's a question. Will the course teach the information for the private pilot's license curriculum to prepare for the test? And the answer to that would be this is not an official ground school course. So the way I would answer that question is naturally, as we discuss areas in aviation, we will cover things such as meteorology, systems, communications, navigation, inspections, medicals. We will introduce them. I'm getting into this little pilot talk here. We will introduce them to the world of FARs, which are Federal Aviation Administration regulations. So while it will not be an official ground school, like I said, it will definitely complement someone's ground school and definitely prepare them for that written exam for the private pilot certificate. See. Is it possible to see? I'm sorry. The screen keeps moving. So somebody mentions here that there's a group called AOPA, Aircraft Owners and Pilots Association, and this is a national group that is very, very interested in investing in future aviators. And so if you go to the AOPA website or even just Google AOPA flight scholarships, I believe it's April 2nd is the deadline for applicants to apply for funds up to $10,000 for a young individual to get their private pilot's license. So definitely check out the AOPA website.
Great. One question is there an added cost for the Aviation Academy? No, it is one of our course offerings here at Landmark. It is not an added cost. Students would just schedule it as they would one of their other elective courses as they move on through. Now, obviously, if a student were to pursue flight time outside of Landmark, that would be something that would be an added cost.
This is a great question. Has Delta agreed to partner officially with the new academy? That is something we are currently working on. Dr. McMaster, Dr. Weshy, and I have already had one meeting with Delta. And so we have some ideas that we will discuss with them in the future. They're very, very excited because they really have not seen high schools be this proactive when it comes to training future aviators.
Yeah, we were actually down visiting with Auburn University and looking at their flight program and getting a lot of feedback from them in terms of how we build ours to best prepare students for the next step. And one of the cool things that they told us was that there were only about 2 high school programs that they knew of that were pursuing aviation of this nature, trying to prepare them for a place like in Auburn in terms of the flight. And one of those was focused more on the mechanical side, and then the other one was focused more on the flight side. And what we're trying to do is not only prepare students for the flight, but we're also trying to give them a broad engagement with the field of aviation.
Okay, here's one question. Well, here are a couple questions. Will juniors and seniors receive priority in class selection? That's an interesting question because even before we broadcast this webinar, we've already had 24 students sign up for Aviation 1 next year. So the demand seems to be high, and because it's so appealing to work, particularly in aviation. So we'll see how things play out. Here's another question: what kind of advantages will be given to students that move on to flight school and college? And I think we covered this a little bit earlier, but just one more thing I want to point out. If a student comes through Landmark and let's say over the next 2 years, takes a couple of aviation courses, if they start flight school, let's say at Auburn or Middle Georgia State University in Eastman, and they show up to that flight school with 0 flight time, that is no problem at all. Flight schools almost actually prefer someone starting from scratch. We call it in the airline business ab initio, because then they have full control over that pilot's training. But again, I think it's a slam dunk case that anybody who shows up to one of those flight schools that spent time in the aviation academy will be well ahead other students that have not gone through that program.
Okay, so we have a question about cost and application process. There isn't a separate application process for the Aviation Academy. However, you do need to be a Landmark student. And so the application process would be, first of all, to apply for Landmark Christian School. And you can do that by going to our website, clicking on our admissions tab, and filling out the online application there. And then once a student at Landmark, as we do our course registration, you would sign up for the aviation pathway. And the first class here this year would be Aviation 1. And that fits into our students' normal elective cycle. And so all of our students would be able to do that if they're interested in it. And Jim, I think you just mentioned how many we have currently. How many was that again?
As of yesterday, we had 23 students signed up.
We already have 23 students signed up. And so space there, we are wanting to make sure that everybody gets in. So please extend your interest as soon as possible if you are interested in joining the Aviation Academy.
All right, so just a couple of quick ones. Is it possible to secure a discount at the Noonan or Peachtree City flight schools for Landmark students? We don't have any official relationships yet where they offer that. I will say I'm talking with an individual who's a Delta pilot that is part owner of a flying club. Sometimes flying clubs are a little cheaper, so that's a possible point of conversation. And then one last question, at least I want to address, is I love this one from a mom. My son would like to know why elementary school students of his age groups aren't allowed to attend yet. I love that, because that's exactly something I would have asked if I was in elementary school and I was told it was only for high school students. So you tell your son to come find me at school, and even if he can't attend the Aviation Academy, I'll find other ways to introduce him to aviation and help him out.
And we have time for really just one last question. So this will be our last question for the night, and then we'll be wrapping it up. But this last question is, are there plans for Aviation 2? And yes, absolutely. Going from Aviation 1 this year, we will continue on with Aviation 2 next year, as well as offering Aviation 1 again. And we'll continue to be building those classes. And Jim, do you want to just give us a really brief overview of what we're doing with looking at 2 and so forth?
Sure. Well, first of all, let me just say too, the number has grown from 23 students to 27 students. So thank you for that information. But you know, when it comes to Aviation 1, and this another gentleman alluded to this, we will be covering quite a number of areas involving the private pilot certificate. Aviation 2 then is when we will start talking about what's involved in instrument flying. So there's VFR flying, visual flight rules, there's IMC, instrument meteorological conditions. And so instrument flying is a whole different ballgame. And so as we advance the classes, we will cover subjects such as instrument flying and multi-engine flight and commercial flight.
All right. Well, guys, thank you for joining us tonight. That's all we have time for in terms of the Q&As. This webinar will also be available online via recording in case anybody that you know you want to pass it on to and anybody missed it, they'll be able to join us on replay. Also, we're just so excited about this program and everything that God is doing here at Landmark. He's working through the school to help renovate a new academic space, and this Aviation Academy is going to be part of that space with its standalone space for the Aviation Academy with flight simulators, and then also a UAV and robotics lab. And we are just so excited about building this. And thank you, Jim, for leading us through it.
Oh, you're welcome.
And thank you for everything that you're doing here for our kids as we get going towards the future. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Oh, don't forget as well, if you have any questions, you can email me at jim.lee@landmark-cs.org. You see my phone number right there at the office. So please don't hesitate to ask any questions, especially if we did not have a chance to get to your questions tonight. And Daniel, there's one more thing I want to say to you. Goodness gracious, great balls of fire.